It is said that whenever two people from Poland come together, there are at least 5 political factions in their midst. I don't think Poles are the unique nation in this regard. Whenever 2 or 3 people gather, there is usually a good advice not to talk politics or religion. Because in this day and age, politics and religion divide us a lot. It is so strange that Jesus says, whenever there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, I will be there. It sounds almost as if Jesus is always in the midst of conflict and argument. Wherever 2 or 3 will fight, I will be there. Jesus had to know human nature that when 2 people gather, especially 2 Polish people gather, there will be a food and an argument. We can't be that different from Jews 2,000 years ago. 2 or 3 gathered in my name, I will be there. Why is it so difficult for us in the 21st century to gather together without fighting over every single issue? Why is it so difficult for us, people living on the threshold of the 21st century, to be united on a daily basis? We all remember how united we felt on September 11th. Like that. Those traumatic moments bring us together. Even now we all think and pray for the people in Florida because we feel for them. Out of the sudden, it doesn't matter if they are Republicans or Democrats. There are poor people in danger. So we pray for them, we will save some money, we'll donate, we wish them well, without knowing how they voted last November. It doesn't matter. Why is it that only from time to time, when a tragedy happens, we come together? When things are going well, we fight and argue and divide. When something traumatic occurs, we are one nation, united, maybe even under God. But when things go well, 2 people, 5 political factions. Well, to make you feel better, I will tell you that it hasn't changed that much since the 1st century. You see, already in the first generation of Jesus' disciples, there were factions and divisions and arguments, and the most famous one of them, of course, between Paul's left side of the aisle and Peter's and James' right side of the aisle. I don't want to bore you to death, but you know what the argument was about. James and Peter were convinced that if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you had to be a Jew first. So you had to be circumcised, you had to follow all the laws of the Jewish religion. Now Paul, on the other hand, believed that it's enough to become baptized to be a follower of Jesus, to live in accordance with the gospel, to claim that Jesus is the Christ and you want to follow in his footsteps. So for the first 20 or 30 years, at the very beginning of the church, the Paul faction and the James/Peter faction were going like that. If you remember the presidential debate between Trump and Clinton last year, this is like that. Paul and Peter and James could not stand each other. They believed it's a very deep and serious divide between them. And if you read Paul's writings and Peter's too, you see how they have to love each other, but they don't like each other. They have to respect each other, but there is no way in hell I will sit with you at the same table. Even in today's second reading, Paul is twisting Peter's arm. Paul says love is the fulfillment of law. Of course, Peter at this point is losing his hair because he says, no, you've got to be circumcised. Love is important, but the law makes us who we are. I can picture this argument when Peter perhaps was reading that letter of Paul. What the heck is he saying? It's heresy. And so our arguments are not that much different, are not that much worse than those of the first century. But like the people of the first century, like the followers of Jesus in the first two generations, we have to come together to realize that there is more that we have in common than all these other things that make us diverse and different. Paul says love is the fulfillment of law. Does it mean that if love fulfills the law, I can do whatever I want as long as I love someone? Of course not. Paul is not advocating anarchy, but Paul says even when you argue, even when you fight, even when you try to decide how to live your life as a Christian, you have to do this with love. And of course, I hope you remember the first part of the gospel today. And I hope you can say, but Father, didn't Jesus say, if your brother sins against you, go and raise all kinds of hell with him? Well, the gospel says Jesus said so. The gospel even says there are 3 stages to that reprimand process. The first stage, go and talk to him or her in person. If he or she doesn't listen to you, bring your pastor or deacon with you. If he or she doesn't listen to the 2 of you, speak to him or her in front of the entire church. And that word church makes me think that Jesus didn't say that. Think for a moment. Could Jesus have said, go and talk to the church when you reprimand him? No. There was no church yet. So we know for sure Jesus didn't say that. We know with certainty that this is a post-resurrection reflection of the community of believers, how to deal with arguments. Jesus could not have said, go and talk to the church, because there ain't no church yet. They are all Jews at that point. So the community of Christians is dealing with this problem. How do we resolve arguments? How do we confront people who don't like we would like them to act? And they come up with a very interesting 3 stages process. And they make Jesus say these words, because what kind of sinner would argue with Jesus' words? Today, when you are tempted to point out to sinners, hey, don't do this anymore, remember that these words are not directly coming from Jesus. It is easy to decide who sins and to reprimand that person. It is much more difficult to sit at one table with the person you disagree with. It is much more challenging to pray with the person you strongly disagree with. That's why Jesus says, whenever 2 or 3 agree on something, it's a miracle. It might happen because it's such a rarity. You see, from day one, when I came to St. Stanislaus 12 years ago, I told people there will be no politics in this church. For 6 days a week, you hear politics everywhere. When you come here, you don't come here as Republican or Democrat. You come here as a follower of Jesus. When you come here, you don't come here as a gay or straight person. You come here as a follower of Jesus. You come here not as a black or white or green person. You come here as a follower of Jesus. All these differences perhaps do matter outside the walls of the church. But when you come here, you lose all the other hats you wear every day of the week. You take off your hat of a Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, and you come here to be the follower of Jesus. Because this is your most foundational identity. Before you were straight or gay, you were a follower of Jesus. Before you were liberal or conservative, you were the follower of Jesus. If you cannot agree on that, there is no hope for us. But because we do agree on that, perhaps miracles will happen. For when 2 or 3 gather in my name and agree on something, my Father shall answer. Amen.